welcome to your weekday cup of the Word. Today we're going to look at the book of Matthew and chapter 1. Let's look at the book first. Book of Matthew is one of the synoptic gospels. The synoptics are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's synoptic because they sync together. They all tell the same events, but from different perspectives. And then you have the book of John, which is asynoptic, which means it tells a whole bunch of events that the other ones don't even consider at all. When you look at Matthew, though, you are looking at a unique perspective. Matthew is not chronological. Matthew's goal isn't to put things in chronological order. When you get to Luke, you'll see that he did have that goal. But Matthew, his goal is one thing: to show somebody, particularly the Jews, that Jesus is a fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies. So we get to see two things. One, a lot of quotations from the Old Testament, so that when Jesus goes through life, he'll quote the Old Testament and say, see, Jesus fulfilled that thing right now. Just like verse 22 of chapter 1 will do. And then we also get to see a lot of the red letters. We get to see a lot of Jesus' words, so that we can see that what Jesus says is a fulfillment of the Old Testament. Jesus had a lot of enemies, and they would constantly say, Jesus says this or says that. Well, Matthew wanted to set the record straight, and consequently, you and I get large chunks of text that just give us an insight into the greatest speaker to ever walk on this earth. And so as you go through Matthew, you're going to see some events in Christ's life, and then a big sermon. Some events in Christ's life, and then another big sermon leading all the way up to the cross. And Matthew chapter 1 is no different. Matthew chapter 1 is going to cover the entire birth of Christ in one chapter. Not a lot of detail, but the details it gives us are great, especially for connecting to the Old Testament. First of all, you're going to get the genealogy of Christ. Now, in that genealogy, you get a lot of great things, but some of the key things to pay attention to are the names Abraham, Judah, David, and Zerubbabel. All four of those guys were people that the Old Testament said had to be in the lineage of whoever the Messiah was going to be. Then some other great names that you get to see are like Hezekiah and Josiah, these restoration kings who went back to doing things God's way when the nation was going astray. There are 5 women that are mentioned, which is a particularly unique thing in a lineage. Ruth and Rahab, these 2 women who came out of idolatry to serve God. Ruth is the woman that the book of Ruth is written about. Rahab is the harlot from Jericho who was saved when the rest of the city was destroyed. You also get to see Bathsheba. Bathsheba isn't mentioned by name. She's simply mentioned as the woman who was Uriah's. You can read about her story in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12. You also get the name of Tamar. Tamar's kind of sad and somewhat sordid story is in Genesis 38. And then, of course, the last woman mentioned is Mary, Jesus' mother. And so in chapter 1, you get this lineage with all of these wonderful people who have put so much color into the history leading up to Jesus walking on this earth. And then the last thing that you get in chapter 1 is an account of Joseph and his reaction to Mary's pregnancy. Matthew's the only one to cover that. And he talks about how Joseph, a righteous man, dealt with events turning out very differently than one would expect. And it's a great insight into what does it look like to be faithful when life does not turn out the way you expected. How do we live as people who will bend to God's will, even when it sends us in some strange directions? And with that, you have chapter 1, and that's your daily cup. Happy studying, and we'll see you tomorrow.